something about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, as it should. But, you know, for some reason, nobody is concerned about the plight of the Chechens. The Russians are killing 100,000 Muslims, civilians there. I think that the nature of American power is such that we tend to be the world's greatest problem, but also the world's greatest solution. When you want the Middle East crisis solved, who do you go to? The Americans. When you want global aid solved, who do you go to? And that tends to engender a kind of bitterness, because the United States is, at the end of the day, a country which sometimes is very idealistic, but sometimes not.
Bob Kagan, I mean, is that, in essence, the problem for America? It has become so enormously powerful that almost whatever it does, militarily or in terms of its projecting its power, is going to cause resentment somewhere.
Well, that has been true for a long time. I mean, you've now taken a poll, etc., but I'm sure if you were taking a poll during the Vietnam War, for instance, you would have found a lot of disagreement with American policies.
There was the Soviet Union then. There was some kind of balance.
That's right. But I think, look, when Europe, for instance, wanted the United States to get involved in the Balkans, they welcomed America's involvement with the Balkans without a UN Security Council resolution, I might add. In this case, we had a fundamental disagreement about Iraq, and I think that is a lot of what the problem is. But yes, because the other superpower is gone and the United States has so much power, we all of us around the world, have to deal with the question of America's legitimacy as a world leader. And I think that, frankly, that's something that the American administration and future administrations also have to think about a lot.
Bob, thank you very much. Next, we've been asking people about American culture. Now, some people say it hasn't got any culture, but assuming it does, do people think its culture is better than their own? In a moment, Peter. But first, some more thoughts from around the world.
It's the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'm afraid, and a little too much of the ugly.
Much of American culture is calculated to drive you stark, staring mad. In fact, half the people who appear on half the television are already in that condition.
America is it's alive. It's a nice picture of life in the world. So we love the life in America.
There's a lot of fallacies that they've been told, like they've been told our sunglasses can see through women's clothes, and that I think the only American entertainer they've ever heard of was Michael Jackson.
They import very few cultural products from other cultures. That makes them less rich than they should be.
The idea that if you're good enough, you can get anywhere, whether that's a myth or not, a lot of people do believe it. And I think it does make American culture more energetic, more exciting.
My favorite product is Haagen-Dazs chocolate chip ice cream. I'm really happy that exists.
America's greatest export is technology.
It's not the hot dog, it's not the sneakers, it's really the jeans.
Hip-hop music.
Probably pantyhose.
I'm just proud to be part of the country that has given the world the Simpsons.
Well, the spread of American cultural values has been with us for years, and most of the people we polled have no trouble in agreeing with one of George Bush's own campaigners, Karen Hughes, who famously said, "The world looks at America and they see money and sex." Now, all countries we polled say amen to that, no less than 62% of people overall. So, name the first American product that comes to mind, we said. 3% put the finger on Nike, like Benze Bhutto, famous for its shoes. 10% say McDonald's, and 24% say Coca-Cola. There's a nice surprise for Coca-Cola's rivals from Jordanians. They put Pepsi-Cola top. And by far the most familiar product in Russia, so they tell us, is Bush's chicken, a legacy apparently of a food deal done by George Bush's dad when he was in charge. We asked people whether they felt the influence of US products and entertainment was too great in their countries. And overall, the answer comes back yes, from 58% of those we talked to. So, is your country, we asked, becoming more like the USA? Yes, say Britain, Israel, Korea, and Canada. But Indonesia says no, it's keeping its own cultural flag flying and becoming less like the USA. All the others claim there's no change either way. So, do people outside like or dislike American products? US movies win the support of 63% all round. And there are small majorities for popular music, 53%, and American clothing. It may look like 94%, it's actually 49% of our world that likes the jeans. But on US drinks, the largest group, 45% dislike them. Television, 46% hate it. And American food, it wins the distaste of 54% of those we talk to. Now, finally, we asked if people reckon their country is more cultured than the USA. And we asked them to take account of education standards and things like that. Most believe they are more cultured than America, with considerable majorities. As you can see there, Jordan, Britain, France, overwhelmingly believe they're reluctant to rate American culture higher than their own. But curiously, Brazil, Korea, and Israel reckon that they're less cultured, education may have a lot to do with it, than the USA. Finally, some heartening news for the creators of American television. Although US historians may see it as depressing, in a BBC poll on the internet, not quite as scientific as our main ICM poll, I may say, Homer Simpson and Abraham Lincoln vied for the top position. And who do you think won? Matt Groening's cartoon anti-hero, of course, Duh, as Homer Simpson would have said. Anyway, let's get reaction to what the world thinks of American culture from our broadcasters around the globe. First, Gary Langer in New York. He's the polling director for ABC News, ready to give his views of the poll. Gary.
Well, you know, what you find here is that most Americans have a very positive view of the United States, not surprisingly. They think it's a good place to live. Most support most of its policies. Most think there are other people who would like to live here. It's interesting when we talk about arrogance and about culture. There's a view measured in this survey and in others that many people see the United States as arrogant, including many Americans. At the same time, personally, rather than politically, when you ask if Americans, if they think their culture is the world's greatest, only 44% say yes, a majority say no. So the cultural imperialism of which the United States may be accused, in a corporate sense, perhaps in a political sense, doesn't seem to be reflected in a personal sense in the opinions of most Americans. They don't say their own culture is better. Also, you know, we find in this poll a broad sense that American culture has too much influence in other societies, yet at the same time in this sort of split image, we see a broad level of admiration and support and appreciation for U.S. movies, for example, and U.S. popular music. You know, the United States, as has been discussed, is always going to be a lightning rod. As the world's only superpower, as by far the world's strongest economic power, there are those who will look to the United States for its cultural products as well as for its political support. And there are those who will be disappointed in what they find, and in other cases, those who will be appreciative of it. And I think that's very clearly what we see here. The view of Americans clearly is that they rate their own life and their own nation and their own culture quite highly. What might have been interesting, we don't see it in this survey, is to ask other folks in other countries to rate their own nations and politics and cultures and see how that stacks up in comparison. That, of course, is something they may know better than the image of the United States.
Okay, Gary, well, thank you very much. And for more detail now from Australia, here's Tony Jones in Sydney.
Well, Peter, our polling does look at that sort of breakdown, really. It shows that 63% of us think Australia is more cultured than America. And as you said before, that may seem surprising when you think of America's role as the engine room of world culture, but you have to read that figure in context with the question people were asked, which defines culture and cultured in terms of good taste and manners and upbringing and education. On these sorts of issues, we tend to see America through the prism of its own mass media, where there's not much evidence of any of those things. Just take, for example, the Jerry Springer Show, which screens daily on Australian television. In shows like this, you can watch civil society literally imploding on screen. Friends are pitted against friends, neighbours against neighbours. People are confronted with news of their partner's secret sexual affairs in front of a studio audience. Abuse is encouraged. All in brawls are commonplace. It's tasteless, it's ill-mannered, it's crass. And this may be America's dirty washing, but it's actually hanging on our lines. So on this score, the survey here shows Australians are clearly concerned about being swamped by the influence of American culture. Fully 2/3 of us think American products and entertainment have too much influence. You've only got to watch your kids blasting away at unnamed enemies in video games to see how addictive this all is, or listen to them speaking like Bart Simpson. It just seems we can't stop consuming this stuff. We love American movies and popular music, and even half of us like American television, which is surprising. But this duality, if you like, is reflected right through the poll here. Australians largely regard America as arrogant, but they still think it's a force for good in the world. And more than any other country in the survey, Australians feel they're becoming more like America, but an overwhelming majority of us don't want the American economic system copied in this country. So looking at the results overall, the big picture appears to be the majority of Australians, though a bare majority, are comfortable with being closely linked to the last superpower as a military protector, but they don't want to become a mini America. Back to you, Peter.
Tony, thank you very much. And now back to Europe, another country famous for its cultural independence. Alain de Chalvron is in Paris, France for us. Alain.
Yes, as soon as it comes to culture, you come to France. Thank you. I want to understand it as a compliment, and not only because France should be, you know, this Asterix and Obelix country protected by high walls against the invasion of Hollywood, rock and roll music, and Coca-Cola. Yes. Well, indeed, France is proud, that's true, of its culture and history. 74% of the French think France is more cultured than the US. It is a large figure, but less than the British, 78%, which cannot be considered as narrow anti-Americans. Nevertheless, yes, it's true that we have subconsciously a very ugly feeling of superiority versus America and many other countries on the field of culture and history. But at the same time, we have the feeling of a threat on this particular point. The American entertainment industry is so strong, though rich, that it can easily kill weaker industries that have not a worldwide market. See the Italian cinema, one of the best in the world until the 70s. It is now almost dead. Why? Because 95% of the films shown in Italy are American, because Italian TV channels prefer to broadcast cheap American production. And this is why we, French, have insisted to have inside of France and within the European Union some protections. We do not want our culture to die. Is this being anti-American? I don't think so. The poll shows also that French enjoy American films, music, clothes, drinks, but not food, even if McDonald's restaurants are usually full at noon times. Do not mix up this will of resisting a tendency of America to impose its product, language, ideas with a basic anti-American reflex. This is true on cultural matters. It is even more true on political questions. We do think we can like America on one hand and disagree with its policy on the other hand. This is what happened on the Iraqi issue. Maybe the answers of the French to your questions have been influenced by this Iraqi crisis, on which both countries seem sometimes real enemies. The fact is that before this crisis, a large majority of the French people, 2/3, was trusting America, and that now the same majority, 2/3 equally, distrust George W.'s America. Back to London.
Well, I think I've come across a few McDonald's restaurants in France in my time, Jack Lang. But you were the man who put the tariffs and the quotas on American films and American television programs too, with some success. Is it because you think American programming is simply less good, less rich than French programming?
Yes, it's a caricature. I have not introduced a protection against American films or American series and American culture. It is as our British or French culture. There is inside American culture the best or the worst. And personally, I have many friends in America, fabulous writers as Philip Roth, Elie Wiesel, and other friends, or fabulous filmmakers as Scorsese, as Woody Allen. But the rules we have introduced has only the purpose to encourage positively the national or European productions of film and series. And the result is, you could observe it in the